On the 16th of December 1944, the German army would launch its counter-offensive in the Ardennes. 3 army groups would smash through the thinly held American lines with the objective of cutting off the Allies at the port of Antwerp and splitting the American and British Canadian forces. On the 17th of December, the 101st Airborne Division were activated with movement orders to head to the Ardennes to help bolster the American lines there. The division was poorly equipped, it didn't have enough men, ammunition and cold weather gear. And in this episode of WW2 Wayfinder, I'm going to show you the basic equipment that your average paratrooper or glider infantryman would have been wearing when they went onto the line in Bastogne in conditions not dissimilar to this. In this episode, we're going to look at the uniform and the webbing equipment that the average 101st paratrooper or glider infantryman would have been wearing when they marched into Bastogne on the 19th of December 1944. So when you watch films like Battleground or Band of Brothers or any other footage relating to the Battle of the Bulge, you'll have a much better understanding by the end of this episode as to what the average paratrooper or glider infantryman was wearing. Now, as a result of complaints made by soldiers on the battlefields during the early part of World War II, the US Army looked to redesign its field uniform. So in the fall of 1942, the M43 uniform came into being. And that is what I'm wearing here. The M43 jacket and M43 trousers. And this is exactly what troopers and glider riders from the 101st Airborne Division would have worn when they went into the lines in Bastogne in late December 1944. The M43 uniform consisted of around 20 new items, and in fairness, it was quite revolutionary for the time that it was developed. Starting with the jacket, it was a 4-pocket, standardized jacket that got rid of all of the other variations that the US Army had previously, such as the M1941 jacket, the M1942 coat paratrooper, or the jump jacket that's commonly known as that the 101st and 82nd wore into Normandy. And it's a pretty good design. It's made of a cotton sateen material, and to a large degree it's actually kind of windproof. And it was designed to be worn a bit bigger so that you could put a liner, a pile liner, underneath this jacket, and then a jumper, your OD flannel shirt, and then any other layers underneath that. So the US Army at the time was looking at the layering system, which is common practice these days for cold weather conditions. The trousers were of the same material and both in the OD7 shade, the new olive drab 7 shade, a much darker green than the US Army had used previously. Now, because this uniform represents what the 101st were wearing when they went into Bastogne in December 1944, the 101st had taken their trousers and had their riggers that were attached to their parachute units, and they were modified with huge canvas pockets. Now, these canvas pockets and these modifications had been done prior to Operation Market Garden. Because they're paratroopers, they have to jump into combat and they're lightly armed, so they need the maximum load carrying capacity that their uniform and their equipment will allow. And that meant, much like the M1942 paratrooper uniform, the 1943 uniform had these big pockets added by the riggers from each division. The 101st and the 82nd by this time were standardised. The 17th Airborne, who would also go into the line in Bastogne, but later on during the Battle of the Bulge, their pockets were cut slightly differently. They were a little bit bigger, and they also had canvas knee reinforcements. But the 101st would wear the same pattern from September 1944 all the way through to the end of the war in May 1945. Now, these pockets are made from the same canvas material that the tents were made out of, so it's extremely durable material. They wouldn't split open like the early pockets did on the previous uniform, which also had to be reinforced with the green tent canvas. It had leg ties to help secure the load that was in here, and these were only really useful for the jump. You see a lot of paratroopers actually cutting these off because afterwards they then serve very little purpose. And it's simply affixed down by two poppers that just push down and secure the pocket with whatever was in there. There's also a line of reinforcement stitching that's been done here on the inside of the trouser, again, just to try and reinforce them for the equipment and the loads that they would carry. Now, one other major piece of uniform equipment that was changed by the US Army on the introduction of the M1943 uniform was the M1943 buckle boot. The buckle boot would become the standard footwear for all soldiers, both male and female, who served in the ETO during the latter half of World War II. So the boot itself is a lace-up boot, and then the leather on the outside is rough leather. This would be covered in dubbing by soldiers to then make it waterproof, and it would obviously darken it down, much like these are here. This upper part was made of leather, and it had two buckles, hence the name double buckle boot. And this would act as a legging or as a gaiter to tie the trouser down, so that then the trouser could be bloused over the top and stop it snagging. And they were a good boot. They're comfortable. They have a rubber sole, so they're relatively quiet on the ground and reasonably well insulated from any cold coming up from below. These were also issued to men of the 101st Airborne and the 82nd Airborne, but they were despised by the veterans. The veterans had their jump boots, and these were an iconic symbol of the fact that they were paratroopers, and it was an important status symbol for them. These also had another serious problem when being used by paratroopers. Upon exiting the aircraft, there's a lot more snag hazards with these double buckles and with this straight lip here on the boot heel. Now, this isn't as much of a problem, but these buckles were. They could catch in the rigging lines and cause issues when exiting the aircraft, whereas the paratrooper boots had been designed very much with jumping from an aircraft in mind. These also didn't offer any ankle support or any real impact protection, whereas the paratrooper boots had more of that. So if you've seen Band of Brothers, and when we look to the Market Garden and then the Bastogne episodes, you'll see a lot of the men wearing these, especially the men who come in as replacements. And that's because that's what they were issued with. They never had the opportunity to have the paratrooper boots. So we see a lot of the men wearing these. And as a combat boot, they were fine on the ground. But clearly they lack the status that the earlier paratrooper boots had with them. So the boots that I'm wearing now are the jump boots, the paratrooper boots that we see in Band of Brothers, that are made famous by some of the scenes in the early episodes, especially after they've just been awarded their jump wings at their prop blast party. And they are really comfortable. They're a leather boot with lace-up eyes all the way, and then they have a reinforced toe cap and a special heel that's cut at 45 degrees, again, to try and prevent any fouling of rigging lines upon exiting the aircraft. And they are really, really comfortable to wear. They're also high leg, so they prevent the trousers from really snagging on the undergrowth. And they are very much an iconic part of the US paratrooper from World War II. Now, during World War II, they were made by many manufacturers, but probably the most famous one is that of Corcoran, and they still make boots today. They still make these jump boots. Another vital part was gloves, and these are leather palmed combat gloves, and they're a really good bit of kit. They've got a wool lining on top, and then the leather palms were designed there to be durable, especially when using a weapon system. And as part of the M1943 uniform set, I must say these are an exceptionally good pair of gloves. Now, they're not like our modern Gore-Tex gloves today, but for the time they were really good. And in most weather conditions, and today it's about -5 degrees Celsius, so the average temperature during the Battle of the Bulge was approximately -8 degrees Celsius or 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's very similar conditions that were experienced for the most part. Obviously there were colder days and there were some warmer days, but for the most part this is similar to the conditions that the soldiers fought in. Clearly the soldiers had what they wore to survive in the field, but they also needed equipment and gear to fight in. And this is where the venerable M1 helmet comes into play. The M1 steel helmet was a two-part helmet. So the outer shell was made of steel, And then on the inside, it had a liner that held the harness that the soldier would then wear on their head. And if you've seen the 1949 classic Battleground, there is a scene with one of the actors, Van Johnson, who plays Holly, who is trying to cook eggs in his outer steel helmet, and it's a really good way to understand how the helmet system worked. So now we'll look at the webbing equipment and the web gear that was used by paratroopers and glider infantrymen during the defence of Bastogne. So the equipment that I'm wearing here, each specific part has a different designation from the others. So we'll start off here on my right hip. This was the M1924 first aid pouch. Simple cotton canvas pouch with a lift the dot fastener. And on the inside was a first aid tin. Inside the tin is a first field dressing or a bandage and a sachet of sulfanilamide powder that would be used to cover the wound before the dressing was applied. And it was designed that one of these would be carried by each soldier, and it was for him to use on himself in the event that he got wounded. Now, the belt that it's attached to is a 1936 pistol belt, and you can see that it's got a variety of eyelets on there that the equipment then hooks onto. And it's a really good, comfortable design. Taking some of that load are these M1936 suspenders, and these are a great bit of kit. Clearly, they can be adjusted for length, for the body height of the soldier, so you can have the belt resting in the most comfortable position. And all I've done with these, which was what a lot of soldiers did during the war, was then to tie them up with friction tape to stop them dangling. Also on my pistol belt here on my left hip, that some soldiers did have, some didn't. It kind of depends on personal choice at this point, was a fighting knife in an M8 scabbard. This was the standard fighting knife issued to paratroopers during World War II. This particular one is made by Camillus, but there were other manufacturers as well. And as fighting knives go, it's a really, really good design. This was then superseded by the M4 bayonet that came out later on in the war, but for the most part, these are the ones that can be seen in service. This is the M1910 canteen and cup, and it was a really great set. I just brush the snow off, and it simply fits in there like that as one complete unit. Now, this canteen's dated 1944, and it's in really, really good condition. It was a great design by the US. Now, there were a couple of variations. This particular one is made from steel, but there were aluminium ones or aluminum ones. So the canteen itself has a handle that folds out and can then just be locked in place, so the soldiers could enjoy a hot cup of joe whilst they were in their foxholes, hopefully. But with the conditions around Bastogne, the best most GIs in forward foxholes could enjoy was some melted down snow with some lemon powder as a bit of a treat, and that was about it. Now, one problem with the 1910 canteen set and the cover as well, although it was insulated, due to the extremes of conditions in the Bastogne perimeter and during the winter of 1944-45, soldiers would experience their water freezing up in these canteen cups. So whilst it was a really good design, it clearly wasn't capable of withstanding the extremes of conditions that the men experienced around Bastogne that winter. Now, one other vital piece of equipment that every single soldier in the ETO needed to carry was a shovel. And these were vital to allow them to dig in to the hard ground and make foxholes and take cover from enemy artillery and small arms fire. The one I've got here is the M1943 entrenching tool, and inside this pouch here is the tool itself. It simply pulls up, and then this is a really great design. There's just a screw here. It means you can have the shovel at a 90-degree angle to act as a pickaxe and to try and break the ground, and then it can be folded all the way, locked in place, and then used as a regular shovel to then dig into the ground and make your foxhole for the night. The final piece of gear that the Americans of the 101st Airborne Division would carry into Bastogne and into that perimeter would be this, the M1936 Pack, or as it was commonly known, the Musette Pack. And this is actually a really good design. You'll see these being carried by men of the 101st from the invasion of Normandy right the way through to the end of the war. These snap hooks here would allow it to be fastened to the D-rings on the M1936 suspenders. You then clip it on, flip it over your head, and then wear it like a backpack. You could also take the other arm from the suspenders and clip it onto hooks on the back as well to secure it fully with 4 points of contact to the body. But a lot of soldiers are typically seen wearing it with just 2 points of contact, and that's these snap hooks onto the D-rings on the suspenders. Now inside it, the soldier would carry his rations, mess kit, sewing kit, spare socks, and any other personal effects that A, he could fit in, and B, that he wanted to carry. Inside this one, I've got a dismounted raincoat. And this was another piece of layering equipment and wet weather gear that American GIs and the paratroopers in Bastogne would have had access to. So this is the raincoat, the dismounted raincoat that came into service from 1942 right the way through to the end of the war and beyond with the US Army. It's rubberized, and for the most part it's very waterproof, although clearly, like any waterproof gear, after a saturation point it will then start to let the moisture through. But it's a good design, and it's designed to be worn over the fighting uniform. Now, one thing that, if you're watching this, you'll probably commonly associate with the 101st Airborne Division, and that was helmet markings. Each regiment or signals or specific unit within the 101st had helmet markings. They'd have helmet markings for the unit, and then they would have a tick next to it to denote whether they were HQ or one of the battalions. However, by the time the Ardennes campaign rolled around, there are lots and lots of photos of men of the 101st Airborne Division inside the perimeter at Bastogne. And while most do have helmet markings, there's also a lot of men from the 101st who don't. How do we know they're from the 101st? Well, a lot have the 101st shoulder sleeve insignia on, the Screaming Eagle. But there's also a lot of paratroopers that didn't wear them as well. So in this video, my M43 jacket doesn't have the Screaming Eagle patch on, and my helmet doesn't have helmet markings on. And that isn't inaccurate. Based upon original source photos, both were correct for that period. So I hope you've enjoyed this episode of World War II Wayfinder, looking at the standard uniforms and equipment that would have been carried into battle by the men of the 101st Airborne Division when they went into the line around Bastogne during that cold December of 1944. If you have enjoyed this episode, please like it and share it. And if you haven't hit that notification bell on the subscribe button, please do so, because it means you get alerted to every new episode that I release. Okay, I'll see you all in the next one.